I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Welcome to the final chapter of How to Dismantle an Empire, with only the conclusion to go. In this final section, called Lands of Milk and Money, I've outlined the 3 steps that it would take in system change in order to reclaim community property, labor, and sovereignty. In the first step, it was establishing Commonwealth banks and giving them the exclusive right to create credit, also known as money, out of thin air, the way that banks do now, and only for the properties within their own borders using mortgage debt. In step number 2, taking back taxation, I look at the Social Security Trust Fund and using that to capitalize those Commonwealth banks, making sure that it is always protected and always gets a return that will keep it solvent for generations to come. In this chapter, called Growing Community Credits, I look at distributing the credit to pay those mortgages and student loans in advance of their repayment and making sure that there is always as much money in circulation as is needed to pay that debt. And this will create goods and services locally in order to produce more self-reliance. As always, I start each chapter with quotes. This is from the poet, philosopher, farmer Wendell Berry. What one thinks of this disintegration and decline will depend on one's opinion of the United States economy and one's confidence in it. If one believes that it is better to buy food than to grow it, then one is not going to worry about the decline of any particular farming community, especially if that community is based on subsistence farming. I am worried about the decline of farming communities of all kinds, because I think that among the practical consequences of that decline will sooner or later be hunger. In some respects, the traditional subsistence agricultures are the best assurances of a continuous food supply, simply because they are not, or were not, dependent on outside sources that must be purchased. To exchange these locally self-sufficient subsistence agricultures for the good life of a consumer economy is like climbing out of a lifeboat onto a sinking ship. And this is from The Gift of Good Land. And then Ursula K. Le Guin. Hard times are coming when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine real grounds for hope. We'll need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, realists of a larger reality. Books aren't just commodities. The profit motive is often in conflict with the aims of art. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, very often in our art, the art of words. And that was from her acceptance speech for the National Book Foundation Medal in 2014. Growing Community Carets. As shown in the last chapter, the $2.7 trillion Social Security Trust Fund could capitalize Commonwealth Reserve banks at a rate of $9,000 per person, enabling mortgages and student loans up to a sum total of $90,000 per capita. The focus of the current public banking movement is to recirculate mortgage interest into community jobs and infrastructure. Another worthy goal is to protect public assets, savings, and pensions, especially Social Security. But this still leaves the only money in circulation as debt money that extracts more than it creates forcing inflation and organizing labor in the interest of the bankers. Public banks and local tax collection are vital steps in the right direction, but we need to go beyond. To reclaim its own labor, the Commonwealth must issue not only the debt, but the credit, aka money, to repay the debt. Mortgages are backed by the land and homes built on them, while student loans are backed by the skills and education of the teachers. This is a wealth that was created by the community. This debt, in terms of labor, is owed to the previous generation who built it, and the next generation who'll pass it on. Debt allows someone to own a home or receive an education before they give back the labor to earn it. The labor of homeowners and graduates is a vast reservoir of energy, creativity, and competence that right now is being drawn down to a puddle by the banks. Commonwealth credits would create channels so that this energy would flow locally to all the things and people we'd like to irrigate and grow. To distinguish Commonwealth credits from the bank-issued credits we call dollars, we use the sign called a caret that's positioned above the 6 on the keyboard and often used for the nose on emoticons. This caret would be specific to a geographic region and could not be bought by outsiders. By creating new jobs that didn't exist under the dollar, it wouldn't need to be taxed. Both the caret system and the dollar system could exist side by side for internal and external trade. Let's look at how concurrent credit systems could take back our labor from the bankers and turn our debt into beneficial relationships with our neighbors and meaningful work in our communities. 2,500 ways to leave your lucre. Community currencies are proliferating around the globe, but are they constrained from making a real dent in the problem? According to Wikipedia, there are over 2,500 alternative money systems in play throughout the world, some of the most famous being Berkshires and Bernal bucks in the US, the Brixton or Bristol pound in the UK, and Salt Spring dollars in Canada. Local exchange trade systems have grown to over 30 in Canada, where they were started, and more than 400 in the UK alone. Some virtual barters focus on services rather than goods, like the Time Bank and the Foray Kipu system in Japan, where people care for local elders to earn credits that are then spent by their own distant parents. Other alternative currencies give rewards for shopping locally, with discounts sponsored by local businesses. The success and diversity of these 2,500 locally grown money varietals testifies to the robustness of the concept. Warm and fuzzy substitutes for cold hard cash are springing up all over, and for good reason. Michael Schumann, champion of small businesses, writes about the multiplier effect when money is spent locally. In a hypothetical example, $10 spent at a local coffee shop is respent at the farmer's market, then the farmer sachets into the bookstore and picks up The Trouble with Turnips. The bookstore owner steps out to buy a cup of coffee and the cycle starts again. The Trouble with 2,500. The multiplier effect, however, depends on how many times a dollar can circulate and stay in the community. From Schumann statistics, a dollar spent at Borders keeps only 13% in town, while an independent bookseller retains 3 times this amount. Locals First in Grand Rapids, Michigan has found that 68% of the money spent at a locally owned grocery store stays in the community, compared to 43% at a chain store. This is a significant difference of an extra $0.25 making a quick exit with the big box stores. But this isn't the whole Exodus story. Let's say that the coffee shop owner receives $100 in a day. By these calculations, after paying for her imported coffee beans, she might have $68 left. By the time she paid her own income and security taxes, however, it would be reduced by another 39%, leaving her $41 to spend at the farmer's market. Oh, but wait a minute. Before shopping, she'll need to save 27% of her gross pay for her mortgage or rent. This leaves her $24, which she spends on a flat of heirloom tomatoes. The tomato farmer goes through the same process and ends up with just $6, which is enough for a used copy of The Trouble with Turnips. After putting aside his expenses, the bookstore owner then brings his own mug to get a cup of joe for $1, leaving the remaining 2 dimes as a tip. That $1.20 is what's left of $100 circulating in the community after only 3 iterations, taking taxes and housing into account. Neither of those costs can be paid in the 2,500 local currencies, nor can major budget items like insurances, phone bills, and energy costs. Altogether, $98.80 of bank-generated currency has to be imported to supplement $100 of alternative currency in order for it to make one full circuit between 3 people. We've shown in the last chapter how we could keep in local circulation the 12.4% Social Security tax and possibly the 3.2% of Medicare. State tax, sales tax, and property tax are semi-local, depending on the size of the state and what's considered local. And with our example of North Dakota, we've shown how the 27% of housing expense could also be captured locally with a public bank. This leaves an average of 15% of income leaving with each exchange to go into federal taxes. That seems harmless enough. Or is it? If the money made within North Dakota changes hands once a month with only 15% going towards federal income tax each time, by the end of 1 year, 83% will have left the state and only 17% will remain. Therefore, in order to have enough money in circulation to buy their own products and services, North Dakota has to bring in 83% of new money from outside the state just to replace what leaks out in federal taxes. That's why North Dakota is held hostage to federal programs like fracking and the Dakota Access Pipeline. Concurrent currencies. The caret and the dollar are parallel credit systems. The caret is a unit of stored labor in the community designed to hold its value over time relative to the housing and services it buys. Like FDR's Social Security, it is not a public welfare system, but a stimulation of local trade and food production. The measure of the caret's success is how many times it circulates, creating economic activity before being cashed out as dollars and leaving town or the Commonwealth, as the case may be. One way to ensure that it circulates at least once is to distribute carets as subsidies that can only be used for local products and services that anyone can provide. Examples might be food, education, home improvement, and well care, which I define as child care, elder care, massage, homeopathy, nutrition counseling, exercise programs, counseling, or whatever else keeps individuals and families healthy. If a village of 3,000 people issued 100 carets a month for subsidies in each of those areas, it would create 300,000 carets per month in food processed with local ingredients, 300,000 a month in new classes, 300,000 a month in nicer places to live, and 300,000 a month in caring services provided to one another, or a 1.2 million carets a month in quality of life. Commonwealth carets would be free of all income and sales tax when spent on housing, services, or locally made goods and food. Each time that Carets traded hands within the Commonwealth by moving between bank accounts, the government would retain 15% for Social Security. A Commonwealth of 300,000 people that generated the same 400 credits per person per month would generate 1.44 billion carets a year in new economic activity. By exempting it from income and sales tax, local products could compete in price with offshore products without lowering their own environmental or labor standards. While the carrot strengthens local agriculture and industry, both currencies could exist side by side so that all of the products available through the dollar wouldn't be affected. Moving between currencies could be seamless with a point of purchase system that automatically chooses the account that saves the most on taxes. Each resident would have a free checking and savings account in the public bank that would hold both carets and dollars. If the purchase were for products or services that were local, it would deduct carets. If all carets were used up or the product wasn't local, it would deduct dollars. If there were no dollars available, the purchaser could convert carets into dollars by paying the applicable tax. Free trade for neighbors, not nations. Local salaries paid in Commonwealth carets would save both the communities and the individuals money because they don't need to pay taxes when it stays in the local economy. They only pay taxes when it leaves. Pension payments, as Social Security taxes, and mortgage or student loan payments would return to the Commonwealth Reserve Bank, with the interest disbursed to the Commonwealth Council to recirculate again. Carets can be considered pre-tax dollars, which might circulate 6 times before being cashed out and leaving the area. This would generate 6 times as many new jobs from the same amount of dollars to serve local interest. Paying mortgage or rent with carets would have the same effect as making both interest and principal tax deductible for both the homeowner and the renter. Social Security, which is currently taxed when paid in for the employee, but tax deductible for the employer, would not be taxed at all when paid and spent in carets. Both the employer and employee portions of pensions and healthcare would be pre-tax, even for the self-employed. All of these would reduce taxes for the individual and expenses for the local government. All carrot, no stick. Housing, healthcare, higher education, and hope for retirement are the unaffordable 4H, which rise in proportion to income so that they're always just out of reach. Energy, food, and goods are the cheap EFG, made by third world producers whose labor has been devalued by the free market. The objective of a Commonwealth economy is to reduce the unaffordable 4H and raise the cheap EFG until they meet in the middle, so consumers can produce and producers can consume. Without military pacification and economic manipulation, producer countries would already have reclaimed their sovereignty and the fruits of their own labor. This would be the ultimate stick to spur a fast transition, either to all-out war or self-reliance. However, the carrot system allows a slow but steady movement in a positive direction. It gets around the impediments of guilt and fear and the resulting paralysis. The carrot is backed by the tangible, stored labor of previous generations in the physical capital, the buildings, and the infrastructure. These are represented in the shared savings of the Social Security Trust Fund. Carets give communities the ability to use their human capital to add to their collective wealth of fertile soil, well-kept houses, healthy families, communication networks, and knowledge transfer. Instead of the anonymous entitlement of dollars, the carrot system creates relationships between farmers, producers, health practitioners, tradespeople, craftspeople, teachers, caregivers, and those for whom they care. Local governments depend on mechanisms like property tax, state tax, and sales tax to make up the difference between the rising cost of public services based on inflationary housing and the tax base. With mortgages turned into a revenue stream, however, income would parallel cost, and tax exemptions could be used for the purposes for which they were designed, an incentive for greater cooperation to make society healthier. By using mortgages and student loans to enrich the community rather than the banks, debt can be turned into jobs instead of being extracted from circulation. Ownership of houses can be kept at home along with the energy and creativity of young people. Debt repayments would provide the same value to government as taxes, so that a student loan payment can subsidize a teacher's salary and a mortgage check could fund health and safety advocates in every neighborhood. Growing Carets. The Social Security Trust Fund gives the reserve banks of all commonwealths a way to buy back their capital assets that are currently owned by outside corporations. Land, resources, mortgages, student debt, buildings, institutions, infrastructure. They can use the power of eminent domain to set a fair price and issue dollars to pay it. But once the dollars are paid, they're transferred from being a debt to the bankers to being a debt to society, repaid through labor serving the community. Dollars are the extraction of labor for investor profits, while carets are a vehicle for community exchange and societal change. To protect their capital from ever being sold to foreign owners again, particularly to multinational corporations and sovereign wealth funds, the Commonwealth needs to be conservative in never issuing more carets than it will receive in monthly payments or that it can convert to dollars. This results in the formula debt plus tax plus 2 times cash as the maximum amount of carets that can be issued by the Commonwealth. To imagine an example, let's say that a Commonwealth knows that they average $500 or 500 carets per person coming in each month for mortgages, taxes, and student loans. They could reserve 20% of that, $100 or 100 carets, for bank functions and returns on the trust fund and other pension savings, and use the rest to issue the 400 carets per month per person in subsidies for any activity they want to promote. However, if they just issue subsidies for housing, for instance, it will boomerang back without promoting any services to the community. So they should be judicious in how they use carets. Their purpose is to promote production and individual choice, not to subsidize consumption, even of necessities. In addition to debt repayments, 15% of every dollar or caret comes back as Social Security taxes with every exchange. This keeps Social Security solvent into the future by increasing internal economic activity and never touching the trust fund. Lastly, some of these mortgage and tax payments will be made in dollars. Dollars can either be used by government for outside expenses, like buying equipment to repair the roads, or issued as carets at a 2-to-1 ratio to increase economic activity. Let's look now at why that's possible. Conserving the cash crop. What's the right tax rate at which to convert carets into dollars for outside trade? A commonwealth may want to have a graduated system that takes into account the distance that the product has traveled or the similarity of labor and environmental standards under which it was produced. In that way, they can retain as much as possible of their dollar reserves or use them to promote ethical standards around the world. The Commonwealth might have an agreement with the surrounding commonwealths of their eco-state to trade carets between themselves and maintain a trade balance without ever exchanging dollars. This would prevent local economies from cannibalizing each other for cash. Without the ability to extract dollars, a commonwealth with a trade surplus would want to help their neighbors become more productive and have more to trade. To foster hyperlocalism, each commonwealth might tax only 10% for trade with the contingent commonwealths of the ecostate. Then the commonwealth may have an agreement to exchange carets as trade credits within their federation with only a 20% tax. So in exchange for Venezuelan oil, for instance, Venezuelans may receive an equal distribution of Federation carets they can use anywhere within the like-minded alliance, along with the freedom to travel and spend the trade carets there, perhaps on an educational exchange or research on alternative energy and climate mitigation. A third level taxed at 30% may be the trade bloc, which would be the whole U.S. or perhaps 5 regions that divide the continent vertically to include Canada and Mexico and take advantage of different agricultures. Only when buying from a distant country with a completely different set of rules, such as no labor and environmental protections, would the carets need to be converted into dollars at the full tax rate. Dollars converted into carets save taxes for the individual and provide more seed for the cash crop. Capitalism as ego anarchy. Capitalism, as it's practiced today, is really the anarchy of the individual. Its basic premise is that each person acting in their own self-interest will add up to the greatest good. However, no man is an island, and women certainly aren't archipelagos. We exist in community. I am because you are. Without community, an individual must rely on money to feed her, to clothe him, to shelter her, or to care for him when old or sick. An individual doesn't have a chance to be self-reliant. Capitalism is designed to concentrate ownership of the assets in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals. It labels countries that defend against extraction and foreign ownership as nationalist or protectionist. It conflates quality of life with an abundance of consumer goods and makes the sovereignty of other nations into a threat against the developed world. Even the term privatization disguises its real function to turn community assets into profits by conflating it with the positive goal of private ownership of one's own assets and therefore one's own labor. The Commonwealth Council has 3 goals: to protect the natural capital of land and resources, to promote the physical capital of buildings and infrastructure, and to proliferate the human capital of the skills, education, and creativity of its people. The Commonwealth Reserve Bank keeps the monetary assets and pension funds safe in a way that allows each village and hamlet to control its own budget without risk. We'll end by showing how this could trickle down to neighborhoods, the building blocks of community. Love the ones you're with. Neighborhoods share the same goals as the Commonwealth to protect, promote, and proliferate. The natural capital of the neighborhoods includes clean water, abundant trees, healthy soil, fresh air, and a stable climate. Each neighborhood might have a nature committee that regularly tests the water and helps install rainwater catchment and gray water systems. They could share mulch and chicken coops and plant fruit and nut trees so that each block had a variety. Food exchanges might encourage cottage industries and kitchen hubs. The eco-state may make grants or loans available to neighborhoods to install solar and wind power that's captured in their own grid. In addition, the committee's representatives would collaborate on environmental issues on a regional and even global scale, bringing the best of their ideas and energy to the most important problems of the planet. In terms of physical capital, the neighborhood wants to maintain its streets and sidewalks. It may choose to repurpose an empty lot as a collective garden or restore a rundown building as a place to meet for potlucks and dance parties. It might provide loans, repayable in carets, for members to turn their houses into multi-generational homesteads, or walkable cafes and restaurants, open 1 or 2 nights a week. Rather than having competing internet and phone services, they may want to buy out the cables and towers so that everyone has affordable access. The neighborhood is a network of households and families, and therefore the most personal and intensely representative of social groups. As such, it certainly wants to protect its most precious human capital, the children. It wants to enhance the health of residents, taking special care of its elders. The relationships and communication between its members are its highest priority. It wants loving daycares and nurturing schools, and programs to stimulate creative and physical expression throughout a lifetime. The residents deserve security for their persons, their property, their health, their privacy, their savings, and their retirement. A vibrant neighborhood needs youth, adults, elders, children, parents, and grandparents, each with opportunities to serve the neighborhood in reciprocated and respected roles, vital to their collective well-being and even survival. All of this is possible by reclaiming our labor, backed by the houses built by our ancestors, as the foundation on which to build the future. And of course, I end with the paradigm shifts. A neoliberal economy takes the products of third world labor as the first world's do and uses them to reward those who concentrate wealth and ownership for those at the top. A liberal economy takes the products of third world labor as the first world's do and distributes them as everyone's right within the first world. A subsistence economy sees the products of third world labor as belonging to the producers of the third world. Because I've talked much about carrots in the time since I wrote this book, I have 5 different episodes that are linked in the Substack. For here, I'm going to recommend how to be czar of your own fiefdom and 5 feminine economies. And if you go to Substack, there's also MMT and home economics, carrotology, and Bitcoin versus the carrot. Thank you for watching and listening all the way through.